All right, so I am standing in front of a barn in one of my favorite places on the planet Earth, and this has only recently become one of my favorite places because I just moved up here in the last year, up here to the Hudson Valley, upstate New York, and this is the Vassar Ecological Farm, which is the place that I found that is kind of my mecca, my heaven up here. It's the place where I run. I'll just give you a quick idea of why this is so cool for me. When I first moved up here, I live about 2 blocks from this famous bridge. It's a pedestrian bridge that goes over the Hudson River from Poughkeepsie, New York to Highland, New York. And it is just incredibly beautiful. And what's pretty amazing about it is before I moved up here, I was writing a new play. And that play took place on a pedestrian bridge in Poughkeepsie, New York that I had heard about. And I had actually never been here during the day. I had been up here a few times to perform, but I had never been up here during the day. And so I wrote this based on something that I had heard about. And it turned out that the apartment that I found up here was 2 blocks from that location. So I found that pretty amazing. So anyway, obviously I was so excited, and I'm a runner. And so every day I would get up in the morning and go run over this bridge. It's about probably 4 miles there and back. So it was a good, quick little run. I would do it every morning. The only problem was this bridge is like straight up concrete. And so it was like destroying my body, you know, like really I'd get off the run and I would feel like somebody stuck an electric cord into my spine. Like it was very, very the wrong thing to do. And it took its toll. So anyway, my body started to break down, and somebody told me about these gardens, and they said they were dirt trails. And so I hadn't heard about it. So I came out here to check it out. And when I got here, I was like, oh my God, I have just arrived in heaven. Like just miles and miles and miles of dirt trails in one of the most beautiful places on earth. Kind of reminded me of a place out in Marin County near San Francisco called the Dipsy Trail that is right behind the Mill Valley Library. If you go to the back of the library, there are these wooden steps that go into Mount Tamalpais. And this mountain, there's like a 6-mile trail that goes from the Mill Valley Library, and it ends at Stinson Beach, which those who know me know Stinson Beach, other than New York City, my favorite place on the planet Earth. So anyway, this kind of reminds me of that. It's like running through a forest, and it's really, really beautiful. And you see these people tending to their organic gardens. There's a food co-op here. I landed in a beautiful place. And so anyway, I love shooting videos here. I'm standing in front of this barn. There's a lot of amazing art here. There's actually a mural of my friend Gold on the other side of this, so I'll try to get a shot of it before I leave. But anyway, I'm actually here today because I've done some extensive work over the last 24 hours trying to figure out the autofocus on this camera. Now, full disclosure, I'm actually shooting in manual focus right now because one of the cool things about this camera, first of all, it's my first full-frame camera. I have these vintage lenses that my father owned, and so now I can use these lenses to their full potential on this camera. But they're all manual, and I enjoy manual focusing, and so that's kind of ironic that it has nothing to do with why I'm making this video. But anyway, here's what I'm talking about. Obviously, I've been making these videos. You know, I was going through trying to decide what camera to buy for my next film. I needed a second camera. And I was thinking very seriously of the Sony FX30 when it was first announced. I was like, that's a no-brainer for me. I've been using the Sony a6400 all this time. The Sony FX30 is like a baby FX3. It's still a crop sensor camera, but it seemed to have everything that a filmmaker would want, but it did not have a viewfinder, which for me, let this truck pass real quick, which for me was a big deal because I use the viewfinder, especially on days like today where it's kind of bright and I can't really see the screen very well. And also I like shooting from up here as opposed to down in my chest all the time, you know, or my stomach or whatever. And so that was holding me back. And the other thing was I started to learn more about this Panasonic S5. And, you know, I'm a big follower of this guy, Patrick Tomaso, and I've just watched a lot of YouTubers talk about the S5, and it just sounded like this amazing camera and probably the best deal for your money that you could get in a full-frame camera. And so I really did the deep dive on this camera, And the only thing lacking and the only thing that was scaring me was the lack of autofocus. Like, it has autofocus, but you know, people say that Panasonic has the worst autofocus. And so anyway, I thought, you know what? I am in manual focus 90% of the time in my work. It's not a big deal, but because of all these videos, I was kind of freaked out by it, and I was like, am I doing the right thing? Like, am I hurting myself? So, you know, I wanted to make sure I made a good decision. So anyway, ultimately, to make a long story short, which is obviously impossible at this point, I decided to buy the S5. And sure enough, the autofocus kind of freaked me out a little bit because, you know, being used to coming from Sony, you know, the autofocus, I realized I took it for granted. It was so good, I just took it for granted, you know, because this was not all that good. So I started to watch videos on tweaking and fixing and figuring it out. And this guy, Josh Cameron, who's an amazing filmmaker, who basically taught me how to use this camera, although he doesn't know that, started to show me all these, you know, settings and things like that. And there was another guy, I can't think of his name now. And so I started messing with the settings. And I say all that to say that yesterday I conducted 3 tests, including my Sony with this Panasonic, tweaking the settings in the Panasonic, and I think I kind of cracked the code, at least for myself. And I think I found settings that I could use for this film where I think I'll have pretty reliable autofocus, enough for me to feel confident about going in and doing what I have to do for this film. Because for really critical work, I'm going to be in manual focus more of the time anyway. So here's what I did. I did 3 tests. The first test, you're going to see the Sony a6400, and I shot a scene that I feel is kind of realistic to what you would actually shoot. You know, not running to the camera and back away from the camera and, you know, going in and out and stuff like that. Like, who does that in a real project, right? So I shot a scene where I was actually, you know, doing what I'm doing in this next film, which is a film about somebody kind of going crazy. And I did it in autofocus on the Sony a6400. I shot it with my Sony 35mm f1.8 OSS lens, because that is equivalent to a 50mm lens, which is what I'm using on this camera. And I tried to make everything equal. I shot it at f5.6 because, for those who don't know, and I'm sure most people who are watching this do know, but for those who don't know, if you shoot at a wide open aperture or a lower number, you only have about this much room to move in autofocus, or manual focus. I mean, you know, the depth of field is very, very small because you're trying to blur out the background, you're trying to focus on one specific subject. So I wanted you to be able to see more, and also, you know, I'm just using one key light in these tests and just the crappy other lights in my apartment. I didn't set up on any kind of special, you know, scene or anything like that. I just put up the camera and just did it, you know. So I guess that's even more challenging. But anyway, I used f5.6 for a couple of reasons. One, I didn't want to blur out too much, but I also wanted to have a little bit of separation between me and everything around me. But mostly, I wanted to be able to move a little bit. And so, like I said, the first test is a Sony in autofocus. The second test is the Panasonic S5 using the 50mm lens. I'm shooting it at f7.1 because I realized that f5.6 is more equivalent to like 7.1 on a full frame camera. 5.6 in the Sony, I'm saying, which is a crop sensor camera, APS-C, so obviously you have to do all that math to make it equivalent to a full frame camera. So I set this Panasonic at f7.1, so the depth of field was a little bit bigger, and the first test I did with the Panasonic was in manual focus. Now, how did I do that? I had to be about 10 feet away from the camera. So I put something in a spot about 10 feet away. I went back to the camera. I manually focused on that subject. I came back, I took that thing away. I went back to the spot. You know, I went, turned on the camera, you know, had everything, all my settings correct. Tried to have my exposure as good as possible. Got on that spot 10 feet away. Did the scene over again in manual focus this time. And obviously, that was less challenging, although it's kind of hard to manually focus on yourself. But, you know, if you take 5 extra minutes, it's really not that difficult. You know, it's just a little bit more time. So yeah, if you absolutely can't take an extra 5 minutes to go through that process, then you need autofocus in your life, no question. Don't get this camera. The third test that I did was the Lumix Panasonic S5 with autofocus, same spot, everything the same, but I had 3 or 4 feet to move around. Now, I wasn't moving 3 or 4 feet, but I knew that I had a bigger depth of field because I was in f7.1. And so I wanted to see how the autofocus worked. Now, the biggest thing that I did was I tweaked the settings. You know, I tweaked the responsiveness and I tweaked the lock-on, and I'm gonna leave all my settings in each scene so that you can see what I used. And you'll see for yourself that I think I found settings for the Panasonic, and trust me, I did this like 100 times yesterday. I had to reformat my card in this camera like 5 times yesterday. I just kept shooting all day. So I think I found what is reliable autofocus in this camera for me, at least for the scenes that I'm going to be shooting in this particular project. And I realize that light has a lot to do with it, the setting has a lot to do with it, the contrast behind me has a lot to do with it. So I will continue to have to tweak it, but the more I get to know the camera, the more I'll know what to expect, and the more I'll have more control over it. So the last thing I want to say as far as autofocus and manual focus, I'm somebody who enjoys manually focusing. I like being a part of the process. I like being more hands-on. I mean, look, I love putting the camera somewhere and just being an actor, being a performer. I enjoy that. I enjoy knowing that I'm going to get something good from what I'm shooting. And so in that case, autofocus is awesome. Certainly, it gives you a lot of confidence. I'm not saying anything bad about autofocus, but I am also somebody who likes to get behind the camera, set it up to direct, you know, to be that person who is more involved in the creative process, like how much of a blurry background do I want? How much bokeh do I want to create? You know, I want to decide, you know, my aperture. I want to decide my lighting. I want to decide all that stuff. And so I don't necessarily want autofocus to control everything all the time. I want to be a part of the process. And so, to me, that's an advantage of this camera. It's not a disadvantage. Okay, it's a disadvantage in that it doesn't have as good autofocus as a Sony camera or a lot of Canon cameras, but for me, I've worked on it enough now for the last couple of days since I got this camera to feel confident that I made the right move. That I have a camera that cost me $2,000 less than the FX3 or the A7S3, which were the 2 cameras that I really was kind of lusting about. You know, like I wanted one of those 2 cameras. And the A7S3 was probably the perfect camera for me. But I just wasn't, you know, I wasn't trying to spend $4,000. You know, plus I was going to have to get a lens for that camera. Like, this camera, you know, it came with the 50mm f1.8 Panasonic lens. I just ordered, you know, I found a brand new, or actually a used, but like new kit lens, 20 to 60 Panasonic kit lens, which is supposed to be great for this camera, much better than your average kit lens. And so I'm going to have 2 really good lenses for this camera, and then I'm going to go ahead and get some anamorphic lenses. I'm going to, you know, I have 2 vintage lenses that I already have. I'm going to be able to build it out. And, you know, I spent half the amount of money. I spent $1,800 for this camera, for a back that came with a backpack, a tripod, a lens. It came with a bunch of stuff. I can't even remember everything that it came with. So it, you know, just for the camera and the lens alone, for $1,800 for this, yo, that's like off the charts amazing. So anyway, this was all about autofocus. This will be my last, you know, review kind of, you know, videos, because I'm not that guy. And so for those of you, for the 900 extra people that showed up who came here and said, this guy sucks, he doesn't know how to do a review, sorry about that. But for the people who came who had never seen me before and said, yo, you know what? It's kind of cool seeing an actual professional artist talking about this, who's not really a tech guy necessarily, but who is a tech nerd and who enjoys this process and who has become, you know, kind of a professional filmmaker too, because I was hired to do a documentary. I've done an award-winning film, albeit on my smartphone, on my LG V40, but I went through that process. I know what I'm doing now, and I'm about to shoot this next film with this camera and my Sony a6400 and my phone. I think I have an interesting perspective as opposed to a professional filmmaker who's gone to film school, worked with cameras his whole life. Like, before I shot my film, I never owned a camera in my life. of my own. And so, you know what? Check out that film. It's called The Center of Distance. The description is in, the link is in my description. You can go see it from there, and you'll see what you can do with a little bit of ingenuity, a little bit of desire and determination and dedication and commitment to learn. You'll see that I made an award-winning film. I'm so proud of it. It's amazing, I have to say. I'm sure if you're a cinematographer, you might go, oh, well, he didn't do this properly, or he didn't do that, whatever. I was learning by the seat of my pants along the way, and I'm so grateful for the process. And it went. Again, we've won Best Indie Feature, Best Original Score, Best Actor in a Leading Role. We've won all these awards at all these festivals, which kind of blew my mind. And so check it out, see what you think. So anyway, I'm going to stop now. Thanks so much for watching. I hope this helps somebody who's going through this autofocus, manual focus thing. And I'll get back to sharing my process and more of what I do, and I'm probably going to lose 900 followers now. I mean, not followers, but 900, viewers. And I don't know. We'll see what happens. Thanks so much. Keep making art. Stay positive in this crazy world. I'll see you in a minute. Peace.
Take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like to be alone. Tell me where to go. I wanna hang with you, but you should know I'm just a little crazy. Hey, anything you wanna know about me? Sure you want it all to be the truth. Why you need to search for what you can't see? Do you really know everybody in your little circle? You wanna find a way to stop the flow down. Scared of who you're never gonna know. So you look at me, I open up the door. What you gonna do? You gonna walk through to me. Ooh, hey, take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like to be alone. Now, tell me where to go. I wanna hang with you, but you should know I'm just a little crazy. Hey, 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 hey. Why you gotta know what's in my head now? Maybe if I tell you, you'll just walk away. What you gonna do if I don't tell you? I really wanna know if your underwear's a little purple. You wanna find a way to stop the flow now. Scared of who you're never gonna know. I saw you look at me, you opened up the door. So what you gonna do? You gonna walk through to me. Hey, take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like to be alone. Now, tell me where to go. I wanna hang with you, but you should know I'm just a little crazy. Take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like to be alone. No, hey, tell me where to go. I wanna hang with you, but you should know I'm just a little crazy. Hey. I like the way you walk when you turn around. You show a lot of attitude. Hey, you can talk the talk, even close to how you look. I say we're gonna have a good time, yeah. Woo! Take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like to be alone. Tell me where to go. I wanna hang with you, but you should know I'm just a little crazy. Take me by the hand and tell me what to do. I never like